What would you do if you had to choose between your pride and saving the person you love most? Emma Chen faced this impossible choice when her 8-year-old brother Tommy was diagnosed with acute lymphoblastic leukemia. The treatment costs were astronomical, over $400,000, and their insurance barely covered 30%. Working 3 jobs as a waitress at the upscale Celestial restaurant, a grocery store clerk during early morning hours, and weekend babysitter for wealthy families, Emma was drowning in medical bills and desperation that threatened to consume her entirely. But Emma had a secret weapon that she'd kept hidden for years, buried beneath the weight of responsibility and survival. A voice so pure and haunting that it could make angels weep and bring grown men to their knees. She'd studied classical music at Juilliard on a full scholarship before dropping out during her sophomore year to care for Tommy after their parents died in a devastating car accident on a rainy Tuesday evening. Music was her first love, her soul's calling, but survival had become her only priority. Her dreams sacrificed on the altar of unconditional love. Emma's days started at 4 a.m, stocking shelves at Martinez Grocery, her hands becoming rough and calloused from handling boxes and crates. By 8, she'd rush home to get Tommy ready for school or, on his bad days, to accompany him to the hospital for treatment. The afternoon shift at Celestial started at 2, where she served wealthy clients who barely acknowledged her existence, treating her like expensive furniture that occasionally brought them food. Evenings were reserved for babysitting the Morrison twins, 2 spoiled children whose parents paid well but demanded perfection. Every penny Emma earned went toward Tommy's medical expenses, their small apartment rent, and basic necessities. She'd sold everything of value they owned, their mother's jewelry, their father's watch collection, even her prized piano that had been a graduation gift. The only luxury she allowed herself was singing to Tommy during his chemotherapy sessions, when her voice was the only thing that could calm his fears and ease his pain. Alexander Blackwood was everything Emma wasn't: wealthy beyond imagination, powerful beyond measure, and emotionally unavailable by design. The 32-year-old CEO of Blackwood Industries had built his empire through ruthless business decisions and an iron heart that never showed mercy. Known throughout the corporate world as the Ice King, Alexander had one unbreakable rule: emotions were weakness, and weakness had no place in his world. He'd learned this lesson the hard way when his ex-fiancée, Victoria Sterling, betrayed him for his business rival, stealing company secrets and nearly destroying his company in the process. Alexander's typical day involved back-to-back meetings, hostile takeovers, and decisions that affected thousands of employees and millions in revenue. He lived in a penthouse that resembled a museum more than a home, surrounded by expensive art that he never really looked at and luxury items that brought him no joy. His only constants were his assistant Rebecca, his driver Marcus, and his weekly dinner at Celestial Restaurant, where he conducted business in the same corner table every Tuesday evening. The night that would change everything started like any other mundane Tuesday. Emma was working her evening shift at Celestial, moving between tables with practiced efficiency despite the exhaustion that had become her constant companion. Her feet ached in shoes that were too worn but still had to last another month, and her smile felt painted on as she served wealthy clients who complained about wine temperatures while she worried about paying for her brother's next round of treatment. Alexander sat at his usual corner table, conducting business over dinner with potential investors from Japan. His cold blue eyes scanned financial reports while his business partners discussed a major acquisition that would expand his empire into the Asian market. He was known for his ability to multitask, to close deals while barely paying attention to the conversation, his mind always calculating the next move in his corporate chess game. That's when the restaurant manager, Giuseppe Romano, made an announcement that would alter both their destinies forever. Ladies and gentlemen, tonight we have a very special treat to celebrate Celestial's 5th anniversary. Our talented server Emma will be performing a song that I'm sure will touch all your hearts. Emma's face went pale, her hands beginning to tremble as she realized what was happening. She'd never agreed to this performance, but Giuseppe had discovered her secret when he overheard her humming while cleaning tables after closing time. He'd been planning this surprise for weeks, thinking he was doing her a favor. Emma tried to protest, But Giuseppe had already announced her performance to the entire restaurant. She desperately needed this job. It was her highest-paying position, and Giuseppe had been flexible with her schedule when Tommy needed her. Losing this job would mean losing their apartment, losing the ability to pay for Tommy's treatment, losing everything they had left. With trembling hands and a heart full of terror and desperate hope, Emma stepped onto the small stage area near the piano. The spotlight hit her face, and for a moment, the familiar warmth of performance lighting made her forget about the medical bills piling up on her kitchen table, the sleepless nights spent at the hospital watching Tommy fight for his life, and the crushing weight of being solely responsible for another human being's survival. She closed her eyes and began to sing Ave Maria, the same song her mother used to sing to her and Tommy before bedtime. As her voice filled the restaurant, she poured every ounce of her pain, hope, love, and desperation into each note. The song became a prayer, a plea to whatever forces controlled the universe to give her the strength to save her brother, to give Tommy the chance to grow up and live the life he deserved. The entire restaurant fell into complete silence. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Forks were set down on plates with barely a clink, and even the kitchen staff emerged from behind the swinging doors to listen. But the most dramatic transformation happened at table 7, where Alexander Blackwood sat completely frozen. His pen suspended mid-signature over a contract worth $50 million. His entire world tilting on its axis as Emma's voice wrapped around his heart like silk threads, pulling apart the walls he'd spent years building around his emotions. Alexander had heard countless performances at charity galas, private operas, and exclusive corporate events where entertainment cost more per hour than most people earned in a month. He'd sat through performances by world-renowned opera singers, Broadway stars, and Grammy-winning artists, always maintaining his professional composure, always calculating the networking opportunities each event provided. But nothing in his carefully curated world had ever affected him like Emma's voice. It was raw, honest, and filled with an emotion so pure that it bypassed every defense mechanism he'd constructed around his heart. The song seemed to reach into the deepest part of his soul, the part he'd buried after Victoria's betrayal, the part that remembered what it felt like to be vulnerable, to hope, to believe in something beyond profit margins and market dominance. Emma's voice carried pain that he recognized, a loneliness that mirrored his own, and a strength that both challenged and inspired him. As the last note faded and the restaurant erupted in thunderous applause, Alexander found himself standing without conscious thought. His usual iron composure completely shattered, his hands shaking slightly as he applauded. Emma rushed off the stage, her cheeks flushed with embarrassment and overwhelmed by the unexpected attention. She'd never intended to perform publicly again after leaving Juilliard, never wanted to expose her heart so completely to strangers. She grabbed her apron from behind the hostess stand and tried to return to work, hoping to disappear back into the invisible role of server, but Alexander appeared at her side like a shadow, his presence commanding even in his obvious emotional state. "That was extraordinary," he said, his voice softer and more genuine than anyone at Blackwood Industries had ever heard it. His usual commanding tone was replaced by something that sounded almost vulnerable, almost human. Emma looked up at him, surprised by the genuine warmth in his usually cold steel blue eyes, eyes that business magazines had described as calculating and ruthless. "Thank you, sir. I hope your dinner was satisfactory and that you're enjoying your evening," she replied professionally, trying to maintain the invisible barrier between server and customer that kept her world safe and predictable. But Alexander wasn't interested in polite small talk or returning to his business dinner. His investors were still sitting at the table, probably wondering why their meeting had been interrupted, but for the first time in years, Alexander didn't care about a business deal. "I want to offer you something life-changing," he said, his business instincts kicking in even as his emotional walls remained cracked. "A recording contract with my entertainment division. We have connections with every major label, the best producers in the industry, unlimited marketing budget. Name your price, and I'll double it." Emma's heart skipped several beats, her breath catching in her throat. This was the answer to her prayers, the miracle she'd been desperately hoping for during those long nights sitting beside Tommy's hospital bed. With a recording contract, she could pay for all of Tommy's treatment, move them to a better apartment, maybe even hire a private nurse to help with his care. But then reality crashed down on her like a cold wave, reminding her of all the reasons why dreams were dangerous luxuries she couldn't afford. "I can't," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the restaurant's returning chatter. "I have responsibilities that prevent me from taking risks. I can't leave my current situation, no matter how appealing your offer might be." Alexander's keen business instincts immediately kicked into high gear. He'd built his empire by reading people like financial reports, understanding their motivations, identifying their pressure points, and finding the leverage that would make them sign contracts. His eyes narrowed slightly as he studied Emma's face, noting the dark circles under her eyes that spoke of sleepless nights, the worn quality of her uniform that had been washed too many times, the calluses on her hands that suggested manual labor beyond restaurant work. "What kind of responsibilities could possibly be worth more than the opportunity I'm offering?" he pressed, his tone becoming more interrogative than kind, more CEO than potential benefactor. "I'm talking about a 7-figure deal, guaranteed album sales, international distribution. This is the chance that most singers would kill for." Emma's eyes flashed with sudden defiance, a spark of the fierce protectiveness that had kept her fighting through impossible circumstances. "That's none of your business, mister." She let the question hang in the air, realizing she didn't even know the name of this man who was trying to buy her dreams. "Blackwood," he replied smoothly, studying her reaction carefully. He expected immediate recognition, perhaps intimidation, maybe even the starstruck awe that his name usually generated. Alexander Blackwood was a household name in business circles. His face on magazine covers. His company's stock ticker symbol known by every investor in the country. But Emma simply nodded politely, showing no signs of recognition, and somehow, that complete lack of impressed reaction intrigued him even more than her extraordinary voice. "Mr. Blackwood, I genuinely appreciate your generous offer, but I need stability and certainty, not dreams and possibilities," Emma said firmly, squaring her shoulders despite the exhaustion evident in every line of her body. "If you'll excuse me, I have other tables waiting for service, and I can't afford to lose this job." She turned to walk away, but Alexander caught her wrist gently, careful not to hurt her but firm enough to stop her movement. The brief contact sent an unexpected jolt through both of them, a connection that neither had anticipated or wanted. "Dreams and possibilities pay better than you might think," he said, his voice dropping to a more intimate register. "I'm offering you a $200,000 signing bonus, paid immediately upon contract signature, plus a guaranteed salary of $75,000 a month for the first year, with performance bonuses that could double that amount." Emma's knees nearly buckled at the astronomical figures. That signing bonus alone would cover 6 months of Tommy's treatment, plus their rent, plus groceries, plus the mountain of bills that kept her awake at night. The monthly salary was more than she currently made in an entire year working 3 jobs. But Emma had learned through painful experience not to trust offers that seemed too good to be true, especially from wealthy strangers who appeared out of nowhere with life-changing propositions. "What's the catch?" she asked suspiciously, her street-smart instincts warning her that nothing in life came without a price. Rich men don't throw around life-changing offers to random waitresses without expecting something significant in return. Alexander smiled, a rare genuine expression that transformed his entire face from cold corporate mask to something almost boyish and appealing. "No catch, no hidden agenda. Just exceptional talent meeting the right opportunity at the perfect moment. But I do need an answer tonight. I'm flying to Tokyo tomorrow morning for a 3-week business trip, and this opportunity won't wait for my return." Emma's mind raced through possibilities and consequences, hope and fear warring in her chest. This stranger was offering her more money than she'd seen in her entire life, enough to solve every problem that kept her awake at night, enough to give Tommy the best possible care. But something felt fundamentally wrong about the situation, some instinct warning her that accepting help from this powerful man would change her life in ways she couldn't predict or control. "I need time to think, to consider all the implications," she said, stalling for time while her mind tried to process the magnitude of what was being offered. "Time is a luxury you can't afford," Alexander replied, his business mask slipping back into place. his voice becoming harder and more calculating. "I can see it in your eyes, in the way you carry yourself, in the desperation you're trying so hard to hide. You're drowning in some kind of crisis, probably financial, and whatever you're trying to fix or save, this contract is your lifeline." His words hit too close to home, striking at the carefully constructed walls Emma had built around her private pain. "You don't know anything about me or my situation," she said, but her voice lacked conviction, and they both knew he'd seen through her defensive facade. "I know you're working multiple jobs based on the calluses on your hands and the exhaustion in your eyes. I know those aren't designer clothes, and I know that song came from a place of deep, personal pain that most people never experience. I also know that pride and stubbornness won't pay medical bills or solve whatever crisis is consuming your life." Alexander's voice was clinical now, dissecting her situation like a business analyst reviewing a failing company. Emma felt completely exposed, vulnerable, and angry at this stranger's presumption. "My life isn't a business transaction that you can analyze and purchase, Mr. Blackwood. Some things in this world can't and shouldn't be bought, no matter how much money you throw at them." She pulled her wrist free from his gentle grip and walked away with as much dignity as she could muster, leaving Alexander standing alone near the stage, more intrigued and affected by a woman than he'd been in years, wondering why her rejection felt more like a victory than most of his successful business deals. 3 days after their encounter at Celestial, Alexander couldn't get Emma's voice out of his head, and more disturbing, he couldn't stop thinking about the pain he'd seen in her eyes. He tried to focus on his usual routine of back-to-back meetings, hostile takeovers, and the endless stream of decisions that kept his empire growing, but every conference call was interrupted by the memory of her performance. Every contract review was haunted by her desperate refusal of his offer. His assistant, Rebecca Martinez, had worked for him for 5 years and prided herself on anticipating his every need, but she'd never seen him so distracted. "Sir, you've been staring at the Henderson acquisition contract for 30 minutes without signing it," she said carefully. "Should I reschedule your afternoon video conference with the London office? You seem to have something else on your mind." Alexander realized he'd been thinking about Emma again, specifically about the way she'd said that some things couldn't be bought. In his world, everything had a price. Loyalty, silence, cooperation, even love, as Victoria had proven. But Emma had walked away from more money than most people saw in a lifetime, and her reasons remained a mystery that gnawed at him. Against his better judgment and every principle of personal privacy he'd ever maintained, Alexander had his head of security, David Chen, conduct a comprehensive background investigation. He told himself it was standard business practice, due diligence before making such a substantial investment in an unknown performer. But deep down, he knew he needed to understand why Emma had walked away. What could possibly be more important than financial security? What David's investigation revealed broke through Alexander's carefully constructed emotional barriers like a sledgehammer through glass. Emma Chen, 26 years old, former Juilliard scholarship student, orphaned at 18 when her parents were killed by a drunk driver. Sole guardian and caretaker of her younger brother Tommy Chen, 8 years old, diagnosed with acute lymphoblastic leukemia 6 months ago. Current medical debt: $437,000 and climbing. Emma's credit cards were maxed out to their limits. She'd taken a second mortgage on their small 2-bedroom apartment, and she was currently 3 weeks behind on several critical payments. But what struck Alexander most profoundly was a detailed note in Tommy's medical file that David had somehow obtained through his network of contacts. During Tommy's chemotherapy sessions, when the boy was weak, scared, and suffering from severe nausea and anxiety, Emma would sing to him. The nurses reported that Tommy's vital signs improved dramatically during these sessions. His anxiety levels decreased. His pain seemed more manageable, and other children in the pediatric ward would gather around to listen, creating impromptu concerts that brought hope to the darkest corners of the hospital. Emma had been doing this for months, using her extraordinary gift not for fame or fortune, but to heal her brother's spirit and bring comfort to other suffering children. She'd given up her dreams, her career, her entire future to become a full-time caregiver, working multiple jobs to pay for treatment while using her voice as medicine for broken hearts. That evening, Alexander did something completely unprecedented in his carefully controlled life. He dismissed his driver, cancelled his dinner meeting with potential investors, and drove himself to Children's Memorial Hospital. He wore jeans and a casual sweater instead of his usual designer suits, added a baseball cap and sunglasses, hoping to blend in with the crowd of visitors and avoid recognition. What he witnessed in the pediatric oncology ward changed him forever, cracking open places in his heart that he'd thought were permanently sealed. Emma sat beside Tommy's bed in the children's ward, her brother's small, pale hand engulfed in both of hers, singing a gentle lullaby that seemed to transform the sterile medical environment into something magical and healing. Tommy's face, thin and pale from months of aggressive treatment, his head bald from chemotherapy, lit up with pure joy and absolute adoration for his sister. Despite his obvious physical weakness, his eyes sparkled with life and love when Emma sang, as if her voice was literally breathing strength back into his small body. Other children had wheeled their 4 stands closer to Tommy's bed, creating a small audience of incredibly brave little souls fighting battles far too big for their tiny bodies. Some were completely bald from treatment, others wore colorful bandanas or knit caps, but all of them shared the same expression of wonder and hope as Emma's voice filled the ward. "Emma, sing the rainbow song," whispered a little girl named Sophia, maybe 6 years old, with huge brown eyes and no hair, her small body dwarfed by the hospital gown that covered her thin frame. "It makes me dream about flying." Emma smiled with infinite tenderness and began, "Somewhere over the rainbow," her voice floating through the ward like a healing balm, transforming the clinical space into something that felt sacred and hopeful. Alexander watched from the doorway, his chest tight with an emotion he couldn't name, couldn't categorize, couldn't control. When the song ended, Tommy looked up at his sister with the complete, unwavering adoration that only children can give. "Emma, when I'm all better and strong again, will you sing on the big stage like we used to talk about before I got sick? Will you be famous and sing for lots of people?" Emma's smile faltered for just a moment, her eyes filling with tears that she quickly blinked away before kissing Tommy's forehead. "Of course, buddy. When you're completely better and healthy, we'll do everything we used to dream about together. You can play piano while I sing, just like Mom and Dad used to do." Alexander knew she was lying to protect her brother's hope, sacrificing her own dreams to maintain Tommy's fighting spirit, and that realization shattered something fundamental inside him. Here was a woman who'd given up everything, her education, her career, her future, her dreams, not for money or status or personal gain, but for pure, selfless, unconditional love. He left the hospital and drove straight to Celestial Restaurant, arriving during Emma's late shift. She was moving between tables with practiced efficiency despite the bone-deep exhaustion that had become her constant companion. Her smile professional but strained as she served wealthy clients who complained about minor inconveniences while she carried the weight of life and death decisions on her shoulders. When Emma saw Alexander approaching her station, her expression immediately hardened with suspicion and defensive anger. "Mr. Blackwood, I thought I made it clear that I'm not interested in your offer, regardless of how generous it might be." "I know about Tommy," he said quietly, his voice gentler than she'd ever heard it. "I know about his leukemia, about your parents, about the medical bills, about everything you've sacrificed to take care of him." Emma froze completely, her face going white with shock and then flushing red with fury. "How dare you investigate my family and invade our privacy?" she hissed, her voice shaking with rage. "You have no right to pry into our personal business." Alexander raised his hand in a gesture of peace, his expression earnest and apologetic. "I'm not here to use that information against you or to manipulate you with your brother's illness. I'm here because I finally understand why you couldn't take risks, why stability meant more to you than opportunity." Emma's hands shook as she set down her serving tray, her entire body trembling with a mixture of anger, fear, and exhaustion. "If you're here to offer me pity money or some kind of charity disguised as a business deal, you can leave right now. We don't need your sympathy." But Alexander shook his head, his expression more serious and determined than she'd ever seen. "I'm not here to offer you charity or pity. I'm here to offer you a genuine partnership that could help Tommy and hundreds of other children like him, while giving you the chance to use your gift in a way that honors everything you've sacrificed. Despite her anger and suspicion, Emma found herself listening, curiosity overriding her defensive instincts. Alexander continued, his voice gaining strength and conviction as he spoke. I want to create a comprehensive music therapy program at children's hospitals across the country. You would be the national director, developing programs that use music to help young patients cope with treatment, reduce anxiety, manage pain, and maintain hope during the darkest times of their lives. Emma stared at him, her mind racing as she tried to process what he was proposing. You're talking about turning my brother's suffering into a business opportunity, she said slowly, but Alexander could hear the interest in her voice despite her wariness. I'm talking about turning your love for your brother into a healing force that could touch thousands of lives, he replied. Full salary of $150,000 annually, comprehensive benefits package, and all of Tommy's medical expenses covered completely by the company's Platinum Health Plan. But more than that, you'd be creating something that could change how children experience medical treatment. Emma's protective instincts warred with the hope that was beginning to bloom in her chest. Why would you do this? What do you really get out of it? She asked, still suspicious of his motives. Alexander's answer surprised them both with its honesty and vulnerability. I get to remember what it feels like to do something because it's right and meaningful, not just because it's profitable. I get to be part of something that matters more than stock prices and market dominance. For the first time since their initial meeting, Emma saw past his corporate facade to the man underneath. And what she saw there made her begin to believe that maybe, just maybe, this impossible offer might be real. Over the following 3 months, Emma and Alexander worked together 18 hours a day to develop the most comprehensive music therapy program ever attempted in pediatric healthcare. Their professional relationship slowly evolved into something deeper and more complex, though both fought against their growing connection with every defense mechanism they possessed. Emma couldn't allow herself to trust that someone so wealthy and powerful could genuinely care about her world, while Alexander struggled with emotions he'd sworn off forever after Victoria's devastating betrayal. The program launched simultaneously at Children's Memorial Hospital and 3 other major medical centers across the state, with Emma as the national director and a team of trained music therapists working under her guidance. She created innovative sessions where children could sing, learn instruments, write songs about their experiences, and express their deepest fears and brightest hopes through musical creativity. Emma developed specialized programs for different types of treatments, gentle lullabies for children undergoing chemotherapy, upbeat rhythm sessions for physical therapy, collaborative songwriting for long-term patients, and family music sessions that helped parents and siblings cope with their own emotional trauma. She worked with doctors and nurses to integrate music into medical procedures, using songs to distract children during painful treatments and celebrate milestones in their recovery. The results exceeded everyone's wildest expectations and revolutionized pediatric care at every participating hospital. Children who had been withdrawn and depressed began actively participating in their treatment plans. Pain medication requirements decreased by an average of 30% during music therapy sessions. Hospital stays shortened as children's mental health improved alongside their physical healing. Most importantly, hope returned to families who had been drowning in despair and helplessness. Alexander found himself visiting the program far more frequently than his role as CEO required, drawn not just to Emma's incredible work but to the woman herself. He watched her transform shy, frightened children into confident young performers, comfort grieving parents with simple songs that spoke to their deepest pain, and bring light and laughter to the darkest corners of the pediatric ward. Through working together, Alexander began to see Emma's extraordinary strength, intelligence, and compassion. She challenged his business decisions not with ego or defiance, but with thoughtful questions that made him consider the human impact of every choice. She introduced him to families whose lives had been forever changed by his investment, showing him that true success could be measured in healing rather than profit margins. Emma, meanwhile, discovered layers to Alexander that contradicted everything she'd assumed about wealthy executives. He remembered the names of every child in the program, asked about their progress with genuine concern, and often arrived at the hospital with small gifts, books, games, or instruments that he'd chosen specifically for individual patients. He was thoughtful, surprisingly gentle, and possessed a dry sense of humor that could make her laugh even during the most stressful days. One evening in late autumn, after a particularly successful session where Tommy had played piano for the first time since his diagnosis, Alexander and Emma found themselves alone in the music room. The last of the children had been wheeled back to their rooms, the instruments had been cleaned and stored, and the soft lighting created an intimate atmosphere that neither had planned but both had been unconsciously hoping for. "You've given me my life back," Emma said softly, looking at the piano where her brother had just been playing, his face radiant with joy and pride. For the first time in months, Tommy talked about the future instead of just getting through today. "That's because of what you've made possible. You've given me something I didn't even know I was missing," Alexander replied, stepping closer, his usual corporate confidence replaced by something more vulnerable and genuine. "You've shown me that building something meaningful is more satisfying than destroying competitors, that helping others is more rewarding than accumulating wealth." The emotional and physical tension that had been building between them for months reached a breaking point. Their first kiss happened naturally, gently, with the sound of children's laughter still echoing faintly from the ward nearby. For Alexander, it was a homecoming to emotions he'd buried so deeply that he'd forgotten they existed. For Emma, it was the terrifying and exhilarating realization that she was falling in love with a man whose world was completely different from everything she'd ever known. Their relationship deepened and flourished over the following months as autumn turned to winter. Alexander showed Emma sides of himself that no one in the business world had ever seen: thoughtful, generous, surprisingly playful, and genuinely caring. He took her to art galleries and symphony concerts, introducing her to cultural experiences she'd only dreamed about, while always respecting her need to maintain her responsibilities to Tommy. Emma introduced Alexander to a life where success was measured not in profit margins but in small moments of human connection and joy. She showed him the satisfaction of helping a frightened child find their voice, the triumph of watching a family rediscover hope, and the deep peace that came from using your gifts to heal rather than to conquer. But their growing happiness was threatened when Alexander's longtime business rival, Marcus Webb, discovered their relationship through his network of corporate spies. Marcus had been waiting 5 years for the perfect opportunity to destroy Alexander's reputation and business empire after Alexander had outmaneuvered him in a crucial merger that cost Marcus hundreds of millions of dollars. He saw Emma as the perfect weapon to finally get his revenge. Marcus began a carefully orchestrated campaign of corporate sabotage and character assassination. He spread rumors throughout the business community about Alexander's inappropriate relationship with a hospital employee, suggesting that he was using company funds for personal gain and that his judgment had been compromised by romantic involvement. He leaked carefully edited information about Emma's background to gossip magazines, painting her as a calculating gold digger who was manipulating Alexander's emotions to gain access to his wealth. The business community, already suspicious of Alexander's soft new ventures and uncharacteristic focus on humanitarian work, began questioning his leadership abilities and mental stability. Stock prices for Blackwood Industries started to fluctuate as investors worried about their CEO's changed priorities and decision-making capabilities. The crisis reached its peak during an emergency board meeting where Alexander's major investors and board members demanded that he choose between his personal relationship and his company's reputation. The conference room was filled with men in expensive suits who had built their fortunes on Alexander's ruthless business instincts, and they were deeply concerned by his recent transformation. "This relationship is making you weak and unfocused, Alexander," said board member Harrison Gray, a man who had known Alexander since his early days building the company. "The shareholders are genuinely concerned about your decision-making abilities and whether you're still capable of putting the company's interests first. Your stock options are down 15% this quarter," added investor Robert Chen. "The market has no confidence in a CEO who appears to be making emotional rather than strategic decisions. You need to end this distraction and return to the aggressive leadership style that built this empire." Alexander's old instincts kicked in with familiar force. For over a decade, He'd survived and thrived by being ruthless, calculating, and completely focused on business success above all else. He'd built his reputation on never letting emotions cloud his judgment, never allowing personal relationships to interfere with profitable decisions. The smart business move, the move that would protect everything he'd worked to build, would be to end the music therapy program, distance himself completely from Emma, and return to the cold, calculated world where he belonged and excelled. That night, he drove to Emma's small apartment with every intention of ending their relationship to save his business empire. But when he arrived, he found Emma sitting beside Tommy's bed, singing softly to her brother who was having a particularly difficult night with his treatment. Her voice, the same voice that had first captured his heart at Celestial Restaurant, reminded him of everything he stood to lose and everything he'd already gained. Emma saw the conflict and pain in Alexander's eyes and immediately understood what he'd come to tell her. "It's okay," she said quietly after Tommy finally fell asleep, her voice steady despite the tears threatening to fall. "I understand completely. Your world and mine were never meant to mix. I always knew this was temporary, that eventually you'd have to choose between your responsibilities and whatever this is between us." But as Emma spoke those words with such grace and understanding, Alexander realized that losing her would mean losing the best part of himself, the man he'd become through loving her. The person he was when he was with Emma, generous, compassionate, genuinely happy, was worth more than any business empire or corporate reputation. Instead of ending their relationship to save his business reputation, Alexander made a decision that shocked everyone who thought they knew him. The next morning, he called an emergency meeting with his board of directors, major investors, and key stakeholders. The conference room was packed with powerful men and women who had built their fortunes alongside his, all expecting him to announce the end of his distraction and his return to ruthless business practices. Alexander stood at the head of the polished mahogany table, looking out at faces that represented decades of business relationships and billions of dollars in combined wealth. "Ladies and gentlemen, I've spent the last 12 years building this company on the principle that profit comes before everything else, before family, before friendship, before love, before basic human decency. But I've learned something over the past year that's going to fundamentally change how Blackwood Industries operates going forward." The room fell silent, tension crackling as investors prepared for what they assumed would be Alexander's capitulation to their demands. Instead, he surprised them with a presentation that would redefine corporate responsibility. "The most successful investment I've ever made wasn't in technology, real estate, manufacturing, or any traditional business sector," Alexander continued, his voice gaining strength and conviction with each word. "It was in the healing power of music and the transformative strength of genuine human love." He activated the room's projection system and began showing detailed reports and statistics from the music therapy program. Hospital stays at participating facilities had decreased by an average of 22%. Patient satisfaction scores had improved dramatically. More importantly, other hospitals across the country were requesting similar programs, creating an entirely new revenue stream that could expand internationally. "Emma Chen isn't just my partner in this program," Alexander said, clicking to a slide showing Emma working with children in the hospital. "She's the woman I love, and she's shown me that true success isn't measured by how much wealth you can accumulate or how many competitors you can destroy, but by how much healing you can bring to the world." The board members exchanged shocked glances. Harrison Gray leaned forward, his face red with indignation. "Alexander, you're talking about destroying everything we've built together. This company's reputation is based on strength, not sentiment. Our reputation is about to be based on something much more powerful than fear," Alexander replied calmly. "It's going to be based on the radical idea that businesses can be profitable while actually making the world a better place." He continued his presentation, showing projected revenues from expanding the music therapy program nationally and internationally. The numbers were staggering. Not just the direct profits from licensing the program to hospitals worldwide, but the positive publicity value, the tax benefits from legitimate charitable work, and the long-term strategic advantages of being seen as a company that prioritized human welfare. Some investors were intrigued despite their initial skepticism. The program's success was undeniable, and the potential for expansion was enormous. But others, led by Harrison Gray, threatened to pull their investments if Alexander continued down this path. "Then pull them," Alexander said with quiet determination. "I'd rather build a smaller company with principles than maintain a massive empire built on indifference to human suffering." The room erupted in chaos. Several board members began shouting simultaneously, some threatening legal action, others demanding Alexander's immediate resignation. But through the noise, Alexander noticed that not everyone was opposed to his vision. 3 major investors remained seated, studying the financial projections with obvious interest. Marcus Webb's attempts to destroy Alexander's reputation backfired spectacularly when families whose children had been helped by the music therapy program began speaking out publicly. Parents shared heartbreaking and inspiring stories of how Emma's program had given their children hope during the darkest times of their lives, how music had helped their families find strength they didn't know they possessed. The media coverage shifted dramatically from scandal to celebration as major news networks picked up the story. 60 Minutes featured a segment on the revolutionary program, interviewing children who had recovered from serious illnesses while participating in music therapy. The segment showed Tommy playing piano for other young patients, his radiant smile and obvious health serving as a living testament to the program's success. International attention followed as medical journals published studies documenting the program's remarkable results. The World Health Organization invited Emma to present her methodologies at their annual conference in Geneva. Hospitals from London to Tokyo began implementing similar programs, with Blackwood Industries licensing the training and materials for substantial fees. Within 6 months, the investors who had threatened to leave were replaced by new partners who were specifically attracted to the company's innovative approach to corporate responsibility. The stock price not only recovered but reached record highs as the market recognized that Blackwood Industries had found a way to be both profitable and genuinely beneficial to society. The program expanded to 24 hospitals across 12 countries within the first year. Emma's vision of using music to heal became a global movement that touched thousands of families dealing with childhood illness. She developed training programs for music therapists, created curriculum for medical schools, and established the Emma Chen Foundation for Pediatric Music Therapy. Tommy's treatment was not only successful but exceeded all medical expectations. His oncologist attributed part of his remarkable recovery to the positive mental state he maintained throughout treatment, largely due to his participation in his sister's program. Tommy became the program's youngest volunteer coordinator, helping new children feel comfortable and welcome when they arrived at the hospital. On the first anniversary of the program's launch, Alexander organized a special concert featuring all the children who had participated over the past year. The hospital's main auditorium was packed with families, medical staff, donors, and media representatives from around the world. Emma was scheduled to perform the closing song, but when she took the stage, Alexander surprised her by joining her at the microphone. "Exactly 1 year ago, I was a man who believed that emotions were weakness and that success meant crushing anyone who stood in your way." He addressed the packed auditorium, his voice carrying easily over the crowd. "But Emma taught me that the strongest thing you can do is love someone completely, without reservation, without conditions, and without counting the cost." He turned toward Emma, his eyes shining with tears he was no longer ashamed to show. "Emma Chen, you've shown me that the best business deal of my life isn't about mergers or acquisitions or profit margins. It's about promising to love you forever, to support your dreams, and to spend the rest of my life helping you heal the world one song at a time." Alexander got down on one knee, pulling out a ring that sparkled under the stage lights. The diamond was beautiful, but more importantly, the band was engraved with the opening notes of Ave Maria, the song that had brought them together. "Emma Chen, will you marry me and let me spend forever being the man you helped me become?" he asked, his voice breaking with emotion. Emma's tears made it impossible to speak coherently, but she nodded enthusiastically, and the audience erupted in thunderous cheers and applause. Tommy ran onto the stage, wrapping his arms around both of them, his joyful laughter ringing through the auditorium and serving as the perfect soundtrack to their engagement. 6 months later, they were married in the hospital's music room, surrounded by the children, families, and medical staff whose lives had been touched by their love story. Emma wore her mother's wedding dress, which had been carefully preserved, and Tommy served as the ring bearer, beaming with pride as he watched his sister marry the man who had saved their lives and created their dreams. Alexander had learned that true wealth came not from building walls around your heart to protect it from pain, but from tearing those walls down for the right person and discovering that love multiplied rather than diminished when it was shared freely. Emma continued to direct the music therapy program, which eventually became an international foundation that revolutionized pediatric healthcare around the world. Alexander transformed Blackwood Industries into a model for conscious capitalism, proving that businesses could be both wildly profitable and genuinely beneficial to humanity. Their love story became a case study in business schools and medical schools alike, demonstrating how personal transformation could create professional innovation and social change. But more than that, it became a testament to the truth that when you open your heart to love, you don't become weaker or more vulnerable. You become capable of changing the world in ways you never imagined possible. Tommy grew up healthy and strong, eventually becoming a pediatric nurse who specialized in music therapy and child psychology. He often told people that his sister's voice hadn't just healed his body during those dark months of treatment, it had healed a billionaire's heart and created a legacy of hope that would touch hundreds of thousands of lives around the world. Years later, when Emma and Alexander had children of their own, they would tell them the story of how a song sung with love and desperation in a restaurant had created a miracle that transformed not just 2 lives, but an entire approach to healing. And in quiet moments when the world felt heavy with its problems and challenges, Alexander would ask Emma to sing, and her voice would remind him that love truly could conquer all, one beautiful note at a time. The program they built together became Emma's lasting gift to the world, proof that sometimes the most powerful medicine isn't found in hospitals or pharmacies, but in the simple act of one human being using their gifts to comfort another. And their love story remained a reminder that the coldest hearts could be melted by the warmth of genuine love, creating something more beautiful and lasting than either person could have achieved alone.